Mother loses child at birth, but when she entered the morgue, she caught the doctor. The hospital room was silent, except for the steady beeping of machines and the muffled voices in the hallway. Emily lay in the hospital bed, her body exhausted, her mind barely processing the words the doctor had just spoken. The world around her seemed to slow as she stared at the ceiling, willing this moment to be a nightmare she could wake up from. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could," the doctor had said, his voice carrying a weight that crushed her chest. "Your baby didn't make it." The words echoed in her head over and over, but they didn't feel real. Just hours ago, she had felt the tiny kicks inside her, had whispered promises to the baby she had longed to hold in her arms. Now there was only emptiness, a hollow, aching void that no words could ever fill. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but they didn't fall. She wasn't ready to accept it. The nurses moved around her, their faces filled with sympathy, but it only made the pain worse. She wanted to scream, to demand they check again, to insist her baby was still alive, but no one was listening. They had already given up. Her husband, Daniel, sat beside her, holding her hand tightly, his own grief evident in the way his shoulders trembled. He was trying to be strong for her, but she could feel his devastation in the way his fingers clung to hers. Can I see the baby?" Emily finally managed to whisper, her voice barely above a breath. The doctor hesitated, exchanging glances with the nurse before nodding. "Of course. We can arrange for you to say goodbye." Goodbye. The word made her stomach twist. How was she supposed to say goodbye to someone she hadn't even had the chance to say hello to? Minutes passed like hours as Emily was wheeled down the quiet corridor, her heart pounding with every turn. The hospital lights flickered slightly, the air growing colder as they approached the lower level of the building. The morgue. The thought of it sent shivers down her spine. This wasn't right. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She should be in a warm room, cradling her baby, hearing soft cries, feeling tiny fingers wrap around hers. Instead, she was being led to a place filled with steel tables and cold bodies. The nurse guiding her stopped outside the door. "Are you sure you're ready?" No, she would never be ready. But she nodded anyway. Daniel squeezed her hand one last time before she took a deep breath and pushed the heavy door open. The morgue was dimly lit, the air heavy and sterile. Emily's chest tightened as she stepped inside, her heart hammering so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep moving, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on a small, covered form on one of the tables. Her breath caught. That was her baby. Her legs felt weak as she took slow steps forward, her entire body trembling. The nurse stood beside her, gently pulling back the tiny white sheet. Emily gasped. There, lying so still, was her child. A perfect tiny angel, with soft features and a peaceful expression. Her heart shattered at the sight. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the baby's tiny hand, expecting it to be cold, but it wasn't. It was warm. A frown creased her forehead. That didn't seem right. She turned to the nurse, but before she could speak, something in the corner of the room caught her attention. A shadow moved. Emily's pulse spiked. Someone was there. Her gaze darted toward the far end of the room, where a figure stood partially, hidden by a cabinet. A man in a white coat, one of the doctors, she assumed. But there was something about the way he was positioned, the way his hands moved quickly, as if he had been caught doing something he wasn't supposed to. And then she saw it, the slight rise and fall of her baby's chest. Emily's breath hitched. Her baby was breathing. Her baby was alive. Her entire body went numb. disbelief and hope crashing together in a wave so powerful she nearly collapsed. She turned back to the nurse, but the woman looked just as shocked. Emily's vision tunneled, her focus locking onto the doctor. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The man froze, his expression unreadable for a moment before his features hardened. "You shouldn't be here," he said quickly, stepping forward as if to block her view. But Emily didn't move back. Her heart pounded with adrenaline, her instincts screaming that something was terribly wrong. "You said my baby was gone," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. "But he's breathing." The doctor didn't answer. Instead, he reached for something on the table beside him. Emily's stomach twisted. Something wasn't right, and she was about to find out why. Emily's entire body tensed as she stared at the doctor. Her mind was racing, her heart hammering against her chest. Her baby was breathing. He was alive, but why had they told her otherwise? And why did this doctor look like he had just been caught in the middle of something he didn't want her to see? The room suddenly felt colder, the sterile scent of the morgue pressing in around her. She instinctively moved closer to her baby, reaching out, but the doctor stepped forward, his face unreadable. "You need to leave," he said firmly, his voice low but urgent. Emily's hands curled into fists. "No," she shot back, her voice shaking. "That's my child." Daniel, who had been frozen in shock, finally snapped out of it. He moved to Emily's side, his eyes darting between their baby and the doctor. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "You told us he didn't make it." The nurse standing beside them looked just as shocked. She kept glancing between the baby and the doctor, her expression filled with confusion and something else, fear. Emily's instincts screamed at her. Something was deeply wrong. "I need you both to stay calm," the doctor said, taking another step forward. His voice was measured, but Emily noticed the way his hand gripped the edge of the table. Calm? How could she be calm when her child had been taken from her under false pretenses? "No," Emily said again, stronger this time. She took another step toward the tiny body on the table, placing a protective hand on her baby's chest. She felt the faint rise and fall beneath her palm, and tears welled in her eyes. Her baby was warm. He was breathing. He was alive. Daniel clenched his jaw, stepping protectively in front of Emily. "You owe us an explanation. Now." The doctor exhaled sharply, glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to walk in. When no one did, he lowered his voice. "Listen to me," he said, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. "You don't understand what's happening here. You were never supposed to see this." Emily's pulse spiked. "See what?" she demanded. The doctor hesitated, but before he could speak, the door behind them creaked open. Emily turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat. Another nurse entered, her face pale as she carried a clipboard close to her chest. She looked at the doctor, then at Emily and Daniel, her expression shifting from surprise to something more cautious. "Dr. Hayes," she said slowly, addressing the man standing before them. "What's going on?" Dr. Hayes straightened, clearing his throat. "There's been a mistake," he said smoothly. "I was just about to—" "A mistake?" Emily cut in, her voice rising. "You told me my baby was dead. You had me grieve. You brought me here to say goodbye. But he's alive." Her voice cracked with emotion. "How do you explain that?" The younger nurse swallowed hard, stepping further into the room. "Doctor," she said again, her voice quieter now. Was this baby really—" She trailed off, glancing toward the tiny, breathing newborn on the table. Emily's head was spinning. Something was terribly wrong. She could feel it in her bones. Daniel stepped closer to the doctor. "You need to tell us the truth. Right now." Dr. Hayes' jaw tightened. He looked at the baby, then back at Emily and Daniel. Something flickering. Across his face, guilt, hesitation, fear. Emily's breath hitched. "Were you going to take him?" Silence. The room suddenly felt suffocating. Dr. Hayes took a slow breath. "You don't understand the situation," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Sometimes things happen that you can't question. This is one of those times." Emily's hands trembled. "That's my child," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You had no right." The doctor's expression darkened, and for a moment she saw something shift in his eyes. It wasn't the cold detachment of a medical professional. It was something else entirely, something dangerous. And then, before anyone could move, the lights in the morgue flickered. Emily's breath caught. The nurse let out a small gasp. The entire room was suddenly bathed in eerie silence. And that's when Emily realized she and Daniel weren't just fighting for answers. They were fighting for their baby's life. Emily's breath felt stuck in her throat as the flickering lights cast strange shadows across the cold room. Daniel's grip on her arm tightened, his own body tense. Dr. Hayes stood still, his expression unreadable, but something about the way his fingers curled into fists told Emily that he knew he had lost control of the situation. Her baby was alive, and this man had tried to take him. A wave of realization hit her so hard that it made her legs weak. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't some clerical error or misdiagnosis. Someone had tried to take her child from her, and if she hadn't come down here, they would have succeeded. The words made Emily's stomach turn. Her baby had been marked, taken before she even had a chance to fight for him. And the worst part? They had expected her to just accept it. Daniel was already moving. "We're leaving," he said sharply, his voice leaving no room for argument. He placed a protective hand on Emily's back, urging her toward the door. Dr. Hayes took another step, his expression darkening. "If you walk out of here with that child, you don't know what you're getting yourself into." Emily's entire body burned with fury. "I don't care," she said through gritted teeth. "You took my baby from me. I don't know who you're working for, and I don't care. He is mine, and I will never let you take him again." For a moment, Dr. Hayes just stood there. Then, without another word, he stepped back. Emily didn't wait to question why. She clutched her baby tightly and bolted toward the door, Daniel right behind her. The young nurse hesitated for a moment before rushing after them, as if she had finally decided which side she was on. The hallway felt impossibly long, the fluorescent lights buzzing above them. Emily could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, her grip on her baby tightening as her feet carried her forward. Every step felt like she was breaking free from something sinister, something she didn't fully understand. But she didn't need to understand it. She just needed to get out. By the time they reached the maternity ward, nurses and doctors turned to look, their faces filled with confusion. Emily could see the questions in their eyes, but she didn't stop. She wouldn't stop until she was home. Hours later, after the chaos had settled, Emily sat on the couch in their small living room, her baby bundled safely in her arms. Daniel sat beside her, his arm wrapped protectively around them both. The weight of what had happened still hung heavily in the air, but for the first time since she had woken up in that hospital bed, Emily felt like she could breathe. She didn't know why they had tried to take her baby. She didn't know who had given the order, but she knew one thing. She had fought for her child, and she had won. And as she looked down at her son's peaceful face, She knew she would never stop fighting for him, no matter what.